Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the Wisconsin Parkinson Association's Ask the Expert video series. I'm Jeremy Otte, Director of Outreach and Education with Wisconsin Parkinson Association. WPA is here to provide hope, community, support, and resources for people with Parkinson's and their loved ones. Today, we are going to talk with Chris Potter, physical therapist from Aurora Medical Center in Grafton. We're going to discuss the role of physical therapy in Parkinson's disease care. Welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Not a problem. You want to give us a little background about yourself?
So I became a physical therapist in 2002, and I started with the neuro rehab inpatient rehab program out in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Now it's associated with the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, formerly RIC in Chicago. And so I really got into neurological rehabilitation there. We did see some Parkinson's patients, but primarily spinal cord injury. I did some traveling therapy after that with my wife, who is also a physical therapist out west, and then settled when we had a baby. And so we moved here in 2011, and I set up a Parkinson's outpatient program at Aurora Grafton. Now I'm working in conjunction with speech therapy. We've been setting up my favorite thing that we have going is a community-based movement class for Parkinson's disease, where me and my speech therapist, Katie Hill, work hand in hand, and it's a really fun way to change the way people move, change the way people talk, and change the way they view themselves and get back out into the community, into the world, and see what they can do. So this past year, I also taught functional neuroanatomy at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So it's definitely, this is one of my passions, is to be able to understand what's wrong and how to change it, and really change people's lives and be a part of that.
Well, I think that's a good segue. We're going to talk a little bit about how physical therapy helps people with Parkinson's disease. And you just said, you love to find out what's wrong and how to fix it. So where do you see the role of physical therapy in helping people who have a Parkinson's disease diagnosis?
One of my favorite things to say when I first meet and evaluate someone is like, so what do you think when they first get diagnosed? And some of them are really upset, and they hear those two words, Parkinson's disease, and from their doctor, and I'm not sure they listened to anything else the doctor said. Understandably, I say I've got great news. And number one, it doesn't affect your balance, and number two, it doesn't affect your strength. I proved that with some of the static balance testing that we have. And then, I had a patient that was a competitive arm wrestler. He ended up getting Giardia in Guatemala during an international event, which means he had bad diarrhea, and he ended up coming into the hospital. So you cannot have neurological weakness if you're competing in competitive arm wrestling. I actually had to look that up to make sure, because I always thought of Sylvester Stallone and Over the Top. This is knowing those two things, we can train the body to move differently, just like you train someone how to play the piano or golf or bowl. The difference with Parkinson's is training them with amplitude. And I have many tricks that work clinically based on research. And it sounds crazy, but I lick my chops when I do a new evaluation, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I can do so many different things with this person, and they're going to be a totally different version of themselves when we're done.
You just mentioned the word amplitude. You focus on amplitude. Can you maybe explain for those who don't know what is amplitude, and how is that something that's very important in Parkinson's disease therapy?
Yeah, so we know when there's degeneration of the substance. I just had two chipmunks run underneath me. Sorry, I'm out here on the front porch. But we know with Parkinson's disease, the degeneration is in specifically the basal ganglia and a subcortical nuclei called substantia nigra. It doesn't produce enough dopamine. Dopamine makes, I call it, in my clinic, because I'm from Chicago, sorry, but I know Gary likes that. I compare Brett Favre to Jay Cutler. Brett Favre, when he scores a touchdown, boom, big amplitude celebration. Jay Cutler goes like this and walks off the field. So the idea with these two individuals is a chemical. Brett Favre has a lot of dopamine, enough to like throw his teammate over his shoulder and run off the field. Amplitude-based therapy is teaching them how to move bigger. And so I use the concepts of LSVT Big, as well as the concepts of Parkinson's wellness recovery, which are two ways to train the body to move differently. And I talk about that amplitude. If I'm going to wave to you, here's my maybe 4 out of 10 or my 5 out of 10. Here's my cruise ship wave, and that's my 10 out of 10. So my whole body moves. So it's the same principle that we have with a lot of things like Tai Chi or rock steady boxing. The idea is getting the body to move differently. And what's the difference between waving like this and waving like this? And then how do they feel that? How do they assess that themselves? Telling, and I do a lot of positive reinforcement. When I see it, I say, yes, just like that. Let's repeat that again. So that really sticks. We know research with neuropsychology that movement training therapy or movement training memory is encoded with Parkinson's disease. So even if they can't even tell me exactly what we're doing or how the exercises work, or when I get them to do the exercises, that big amplitude, the big walking sticks. I think of like spaghetti sticking to the wall. So we know that can be encoded based on research. So,
and I have to think, you talked about the memory aspect. I got to think the mood probably changes a little bit. You would see in the patients as you go from waving like this, it's hard not to smile when you're waving like the cruise ship wave. So can you maybe touch on what you see in the mood of the people you work with?
Oh man. So one of the jokes I always say is I think my Parkinson's patients think I'm crazy the first week that I'm working with them because of the masked face, right? And so as they work with me more and more, I see the facial expression come out and pop up, and it's even harder now because of wearing masks in the clinic. But I can tell it in like their eyes and their eyebrows that this dopamine is flowing. The mood changes. They start to understand, oh my gosh, yeah, I have pretty darn good balance, especially if you compare it to someone where their balance is affected by whatever is going on neurologically. They also understand like, wow, when I'm moving big, especially if they have a family member with them, a spouse or a son or daughter with them, they start to really enforce that change. And what happens then? People start to pay attention to you when you make facial expressions, when you speak louder, when you move better. They're not dropping you off at the restaurant door. We're walking across the parking lot together with a opportunity for big walking. And man, does that change the way they feel. That mood, it's chemical as well as it increases the amount of social interactivity that they do. Is that a word? Social interaction. That's the word I'm looking for. So,
and I think that's great, Chris, because when I think of physical therapy, I think of exercise physical therapy. You're talking about mood, memory, and amplitude of movement. It's really way more than just doing a couple exercises. You're working on a whole number of issues that I think are really important. People don't consider when they say, "Oh, I have to go do physical therapy."
Yeah, exactly. And 3 things that I always focus on in each session is fundamental exercise. But this exercise is different. I talk about like, how do you feel, or how big was that when you came here, or can you make it even bigger? And there's a lot of what we call shaping. I'm shaping the movement that I want, and they're like, oh yeah, that is different. Now let's repeat it. So functional movement fundamental movement, then function, things that they do every day, standing up from the chair, and rolling over in bed, getting off the floor. These are things that we really specifically target for the individual. So fundamentals, function, and then gait or walking. And so changing a bunch of different tricks to change the way people step and how they feel while they step. And the next, like the icing on the cake on all that, is to pull all those things together in dual tasks, make them talk, make them do a riddle or count by threes or fours. And so now we're putting all those things together. It's not like a regular, we're going to do 10 reps of this, 5 more. Okay. We are really catering it to what the individual does or loved to do in the past, and making that functional basically on also their difficulties that they have currently. I always ask that question of, I feel like I have Parkinson's when and blank. And when they tell me that, now I know, okay, we're targeting those things so that your life is different and better, and we get the best version of Frank or Bob or whoever I'm working with. So.
Well, I think that's an important one too, Chris. You just mentioned when you first meet with them, you're asking them questions. You're not just saying, here's what Chris decided you're going to do today. You're asking things that are going to maybe benefit them at home, at the store, in just everyday life. And I think that's really important for people to understand.
Yeah.
So you've used the word big a lot. And I know LSVT Big is a program a lot of people with Parkinson's have done. Can you give just a quick overview of what LSVT Big is? And that's really where some of the amplitude studies originally came from, was how LSVT Big helps people with Parkinson's disease.
Yeah, so LSVT Big, I was first trained in 2010. So I hate to say 10 years ago because I'm only 28. So that would make me 18 when I did that. Just kidding. I'm lying about my age. But the LSVT Big, the concept is steps to a new calibration. So number one is modeling. The therapist is going to model the movement. So that's another thing that I love working with Parkinson's patient is I'm moving all day or all session when I'm working with a Parkinson's patient. I'm moving the whole time. So I model the movements. I do every movement with them, whether it's function or fundamental exercise. I shape the movement, so I get my hands on them and gently, not very gently, move with them, dance with them. This is a really good concept to make my body feel, oh, what does that movement look like? And what should it feel like? That's more important. Like, now, what does it feel like to me as I'm doing the movements properly or big with big amplitude? The other thing, then I say, hey, that's different. When you did that, that was different. It was easier. It was bigger. You may feel goofy, but you moved so much better. And then I stabilize it and say, hey, let's repeat that. Let's do that again. Let's do it again. Final step is calibration. And so this is such a neat concept of taking some fundamental movements that Parkinson's patients their body doesn't like to do, or their body doesn't listen to their brain to do, which is extension, rotation, weight shifting, and of course, stepping, getting their foot off the ground. So those concepts work really well. They're evidence-based. We know that after training, so we call this the UPDRS score, is the United Parkinson's Disease Rating Score physicians use with their patients. Lower scores, the better, like golf. And so after 4 weeks, that score drops. And then even after that, the score drops even more, because now they're implementing those things, and they're implementing it in a functional way. I get up from sit to stand 40, 50 times a day if I'm doing something right. From the recliner chair, bed, car, toilet, all those functional surfaces are things that we actually practice in clinic to try to bring home. I go out to unless it's snow and ice or downpour rain, we go out to the parking lot and practice on their own vehicle. So it's a really, I kind of joke that my head is with this concept, and the way that this research and approach works is my head will float around your house and say, how big are you? Was that a 10 out of 10? And so that's that concept of big movement.
Well, I think that's great. I've heard many a patient before that I've talked to where I'll hear the spouse say, well, Chris or Erica or whoever said, be big, and they will remind them. So I think you're right that the voice is always there helping them. One of the things you just said that I think is really important for people to remember when they see the physical therapist, whether it's through Big, whether it's an appointment, etc., you can only do so much within the clinic. You can help them and you can give them the tools, but if they don't take them home and implement them in their day-to-day activities, you talked about the numbers go like this and they go down. Well, if they don't implement them, you might go down and then all of a sudden they start going back up because you're not doing them every day. Do you see that fairly often? And what do you tell people when you see the numbers starting to go the wrong way, maybe?
Well, I'm fortunate in that our clinic has allowed us to create a program where we have a class. So we call it the LSVT skills class for the LSVT Big program, a Big and Loud program combined. And it's great because people will come up to me and say, hey, I'm really having trouble. I went fishing this weekend. I couldn't get it. I had a real hard time getting up from the boat to the dock and standing again. And I say, hey, let's do a tune-up. I kind of call it like mental floss. This is my Conan O'Brien, right? How am I doing it? I'm looking at myself in the camera, right? But some mental floss to remember, how does it feel? Get some hands-on, one-on-one, doing a short, shorter thing, maybe 6 to 8 visits or so, where we really target using those same fundamentals that they know. Now they're repeating twice a week in class, besides on their own daily, and then really focusing on that function and changing that. It's really important to have spouse or family come in and train with us. We have several spouses that just come to our class and work out with us, which we have enough space to do that. But that's the thing. And one of the reminders that I say to them, it's a catchphrase that they say in PT school now, is way back in the day when I was in PT school, we said smoking was a contributing factor for almost every disease process. Now they say sitting is the new smoking. And so I tell them, the more you sit, the more things will progress. And so the less time you spend sitting, the more, and you're practicing these opportunities for bigness. I don't want to go in the grocery store because I hate shopping. Well, you hate shopping because it's hard, because it's hard to be big in these tighter areas, or kids are running around. This is your opportunity to practice your big in the community and to get a ton of steps in. Versus sitting in the car. So I try to peg some of those things that they've slowly, like Parkinson's, has stolen from them and their world has gotten smaller, and then try to reopen that again. Taking out the garbage is one of those things. I'm trying to think of a couple other things my patients have said. Stop gardening, stop golfing, at least getting them back to hitting balls or doing something that they love. I don't tell someone to golf if they haven't ever golfed before, but what did you do before? What do you love to do? And then kind of relating movement to how they were trained. Meaning, I had one woman that was a synchronized swimmer. I've never met in my life a synchronized swimmer. I had this woman that she's like, when we started doing the movement, she's like, oh, this is like synchronized swimming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, perfect. Because she knew how to do these movements so well. Her brain just went back to those old days of how she was trained by a very strict German synchronized swimmer instructor, I imagine. I don't know. So yeah, how do I want to avoid that? Well, I'm getting older, and all these funny things we make up in our head, whereas it's not a balance problem. It's not a strength problem. This is a movement planning problem. And I can train my brain to produce more neurotransmitter, make those receptor sites more, make the receptor sites more sensitive, and maybe get some more neuroplasticity, collateral sprouting within these axons, that now that movement is just intrinsic.
I think those are great examples. I've always heard from the medical community that, when you do something you love, whether it's synchronized swimming, golfing, some of the stuff you mentioned, your body naturally produces dopamine because you enjoy that. And so the more dopamine you can produce, the better. If you can get them back to doing those things they love, that's a great thing in so many different ways, not just keeping them active.
Yeah.
You've talked about your exercise class a little bit. I want to touch on, I know you've collaborated with a speech therapist during that class. Can you explain why that's really important, I think, for people with Parkinson's disease to be looking at the physical as well as the speech issues with how the disease affects them?
Yeah. So when we're talking about I'm going to talk a little bit about like the loops in the brain. There's an emotional loop, a social behavioral loop, and so we're integrating this idea when I kind of think of a Thanksgiving table where my mom always talked loud, right? So she kind of dominated the conversation, and then you have kids screaming, you have little small conversations going on, and what happens is someone that's not loud enough or not expressive enough gets eliminated from that table conversation. It's just a natural flow, and so they never speak up until the point where they're maybe upset. Maybe politics is a good thing, because then they, when we're upset, when we have anger, same thing as joy, we will produce more dopamine. The problem is then they feel like they're yelling, and so it disrupts that that social behavioral loop. They'll be like, I'm gonna pull back again. So if we can be, as Parkinson's people with Parkinson's disease, if we can be heard, if we can express ourselves and even express emotion with our face, this really pulls us together. This is what there's a lot of chemistry involved, even in attraction. When we're looking for a mate, we use dopamine as well. So this is a really important aspect. And so with my speech therapist, not only are we talking about loud therapy, we're talking about functional communication. We make them communicate with our secretaries. Our secretaries love that. They just love our population and our class. We even do in the class like facial expressions, where we will throw out as part of the movements. We'll be like angry face, and so maybe that's part. It's a lot for our own entertainment, but man, do we we're getting into this idea of like, hey, I can express myself non-verbally, verbally, with body language, and when I'm using these big concepts and big and loud concepts. So
for your exercise class, I assume you probably took a break with the whole pandemic, as most people have.
Yeah.
Do you have a start date that you're looking at? Is it going to be 2021? And if it is, or when it's going to start, how would people reach out to you to learn about how to participate in that class?
Yeah, so I don't know when a start date's going to be. However, we had a successful tailgate on Saturday. It was just to hang out and just to be social. We did it in conjunction. We have a cancer exercise group on the off days that we do our Parkinson's group at lunchtime. And it was so good that security came out into the parking lot to try to see. They thought we were going to protest through the hospital. But it looks like our supervisors didn't contact the right people saying this is going to happen. But it was a nice time to get together. And so I polled them. Everyone's open to doing a tailgate class, which we got to jump through some red tape, but we just started the ball rolling on what about a tailgate class, how we're going to set it up. So we wrote up some stuff on what we're going to do and how we're going to maintain safety as well, balance safety as well as, of course, social distancing will be easy in the parking lot. Mainly because one parking lot is just shut down because that entrance is closed. So it would work out very well. I wish I could tell you a solid date, although our number at our clinic is 262-329-2700. I'll say it one more time, but if you call that and you demand it, that's how things get done. And so we'll just keep, we might start getting our class members to call and start requesting speaking to our supervisor. But again, that's 262-329-2700. So my hope is to get it back up. Ozaukee County, things have been going very well. We haven't seen a surge. We've been doing really proper hand hygiene. wiping down, face masks. You get screened 3 times by phone at our main entrance, and then at our front desk. So the process seems to be working well. Again, we really focus on hand hygiene, and so we're keeping people, I feel like we're keeping people very safe. We just opened up the clinic to 100% at this week for our schedules. We're not 100% by any means scheduled yet, but the return is going very well, or what we call revitalization is going very well.
That's good to hear. And I think that's a positive thing, Chris. I know some things are slowly opening up. I know some people are very hesitant to go to those.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's good to have those options. And I know we as an organization have tried to do a lot online for people, and we know it's important to stay active, but that social aspect is missed right now. And I think it's great that there are possibilities that things may open up sooner rather than later. But again, we will all have to be super safe as that happens. So I think it's important. You've touched on a lot. I think you've given us a lot with, really implementing the activities, amplitude, using it functionally, using it, the gait, etc. When a patient's considering whether I should go to physical therapy or not, is this something that's right for me? What are the things you would tell them to really consider to help make that determination?
One consideration is I think everybody should go and get trained and understand how does Parkinson's affect you, so that you're aware of, like, oh, this is why I feel off balance. This is why I'm taking shuffling steps. This is why when I'm juggling 3 things at the same time, grabbing my keys, trying to open the door and step into the house, that, man, I lose my balance all the time, especially when my spouse is saying something to me. Once you can understand why you struggle with the movement, you can understand how to defeat that small movement. And so I think it's really important. The best version of you, if you're newly diagnosed, it's the best time to come see therapy, because we can do so much, and we can never let that those ideas of I'm off balance, I'm getting older, I should be careful, I shouldn't exert myself. Those are the opposite things we know based on research. Those are the opposite things that we should be doing. We need to move. We need to get cardiovascular. We know all these things are research-based for Parkinson's. The other thing is, when you come, I've had many patients that have maybe orthopedic pain issues, and we focus, and I say, okay, let's not do movement training yet. Let's focus on your back pain. Let's focus on your hip pain or knee pain. And then you'll be able to tolerate the movement training for Parkinson's. At later stages, then we focus on function like that. So remember, it's not, here's your vanilla ice cream. Everything is a la carte. We're going to add, sprinkles to your therapy, depending on what your needs are and what do you do functionally. Do you have a house with stairs? Are you in a condo that you don't have any stairs? So all those things come into play. And if I can get the best version of you, I can really implement a lot. And that's an exponential curve on how much you're going to move for the long period of time. Some people kind of think, well, I'm not going to go until I'm not going to go to therapy until I really need it. Well, we know, research also says, we know by the time we have our first signs and symptoms, degeneration is about 50 to 60%. By the time we have our first fall, now we have 70 to 80% degeneration or so. Well, I'd rather have you earlier so we can work with all those cells that are producing dopamine. So best version of yourself now creates better quality of life for the longevity.
I think that's perfectly said. Better quality of life. I think that's what we're all striving for. Before I wrap up, you've mentioned the word neuroplasticity a couple of times, and it's a word I'm seeing a lot more in the Parkinson's parlance over the last maybe 2-3 years than I did any time before that. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what neuroplasticity is for those who are maybe hearing that term for the first time and why it is really important?
So neuroplasticity is like teaching an old dog a new trick. It is elastic is a rubber band that snaps back and is exactly the same from start to finish, although it changes in the middle. Plastic means we change it, and now the change is permanent. And so with movement training, we can change the way this. Although we can't gain new cells in our central nervous system, like our periphery when we cut ourselves or even have nerve damage from maybe a surgery or something like that. Our periphery will regrow those cells. In our central nervous system, we can change by several routes. What that means for the clinic is if I can teach the movement and then repeat it, now my body and brain start to do it the same, start to do it that new way, and that becomes the new normal. That's recalibration. So neuroplasticity, another word synonym for that would be recalibration. And it's my brain now tells my body to move differently. And it's because we've changed the chemistry, we've changed the way the axons are sprouted out, we changed the amount of neurotransmitter that we produce ourselves and make those receptor sites more sensitive. And that's a plastic change that the brain actually has. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter if you have, this is really interesting. I had two different patients that their dementia was very profound. When I'd cover my name badge, they couldn't remember my name. I asked what we're doing, and they said stretching. But the movement training, they could repeat it through that repetitive stabilization. So I had one guy who every time he stood up, I call that a zero. He's not coming forward at all. So he'd stand up here and he'd be stuck, and it'd be a struggle to get to his feet. A person like that is going to sit more. He's going to say, honey, can you get me my glass of water or nachos? And instead of getting up, probably just getting up for the bathroom. Wow, that's really limiting his world, limiting that lifestyle. So I focused on really 3 things with him. It was simple. Sitting to stand from, forward to standing. I focused on big steps with gait and a couple different ways to do that. And then the other thing he would do is try to pick up stuff off the ground. So we focused on really big, wide stance when we went to pick up stuff off the ground. We went outside. He actually was a golfer, so we swung a club and we did a ton of ball pickups. I never played like 52 pickup, but we would pick up like pieces of paper, pennies, things that he would see. And so those 3 things changed big time. When I did my standardized tests, I use a bunch of different objective measures for testing, something for dynamic gait called the functional gait assessment, a blend of tests for balance and reaction called the mini best, a stepping test called the 4-square step test. His numbers changed dramatically. He still didn't know what my name was or what he was really coming for. He could repeat big, only because I brainwashed him on that, but his body movement was the major change. So that's neuroplasticity. Even though that Center for Short-Term Memory, impulsiveness, and executive function, those centers didn't work very well. We changed the way he planned to move, and that's plastic.
That's a great explanation, Chris. I appreciate that. Anything we haven't touched on that you really think we should make sure we cover before we conclude?
Yeah, one of the things in the last year or so that the neurologists that I work with have been on top of, and what we found clinically, especially between me and speech, figuring out how they're taking their medication. I think of this, if I'm wearing heavy work boots, I probably don't, maybe the boots weigh like 5 pounds, 10 pounds, or I just put maybe a ball and chain on my ankle, I'm not going to want to go for a walk. So your medication takes that ball and chain off your ankle, it takes the heavy work boots off and makes your feet light. So use that medication for your functional time. Don't get up in the morning and do a bunch of stuff before you take your meds. Take your meds immediately, then, you know, probably go to the bathroom, then take your meds immediately, and then spend some time reading. Now, make your breakfast, get dressed, take a shower. When you're due for medication at 5 o'clock, at 4:30, don't be mowing the lawn. Like, it doesn't, that you're wearing like a lead vest, you're wearing that ball and chain. So, and you're going to start thinking, man, this is hard. I'm old. My balance is terrible. And that's farther from the truth. The idea is I'm going to use that medication to create the best version of myself. And then I'm going to move. Then I'm going to do my exercises. Then I'm going to do my, well, I'm going to a wedding reception and I want to dance. I'm going to adjust my medication today because I know the reception starts at 5:30. I want to be the best version of myself then. So I'm going to take it, my medication, you know, 5 o'clock, so that 5:30 I can eat a meal, talk loud, and start dancing.
That's great advice, Chris. I appreciate you sharing that. And I really appreciate you taking the time, the lovely back, you know, front yard there.
Yeah, besides those chipmunks.
Yeah. And thanks for providing a lot of just great information on how physical therapy really can impact people with Parkinson's disease.
Yeah.
Now, I'm glad you as a viewer are checking in with Wisconsin Parkinson Association frequently. We regularly update our website and Facebook page with exercise classes, educational videos such as this one, and a number of other resources to help you take control of your Parkinson's journey. You can email us at mail@wiparkinson.org with future topics you'd love to see covered by local experts. Now, hopefully you're finding these educational video series beneficial. WPA relies on donations from individuals like yourself, so please consider a gift at wiparkinson.org to continue to keep all our programs and services free now and into the future. I'd like to again thank Chris for being our guest today. I'd like to thank you for joining us, and please take care and be healthy.
Thanks a lot.